Okay, so I have a beat pulled up here that I've been working on recently, and I thought it would be a good example to go over vocal EQ just because I followed a formula that I tend to follow a lot. So keep in mind, this is not the only way to EQ your vocals. Of course, there's tons of different ways to do it. It's just the way that I learned years ago and the method that I've used for a long time, even with industry placements. So I figured it might help you guys. So, if you guys want to bum rush me in the comments and let me know that this is stupid or whatever, just feel free to do that. But I'll play the song that I have here, play a little snippet of it, and I'll play it with these plugins engaged on this vocal track, so you can hear what the final product is. And then I'll go through them kind of one by one, and we'll focus on the EQs mainly. So I'll go ahead and play it.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway. Turn me on, I heat you up just like a fireplace. I ain't hard to find, I'll be somewhere in them tri-states. Going hard, bitch, I don't mean no disrespect. They hear my hunger rap like I ain't had no dinner yet. I'm a red sight, you should take a picture of it. I'm not a latest man now, but the bitches love it. She wanna hang out with a star, that kid me gloving. She think about fucking with me somehow.
Okay, so basically, you have sort of the modern hip hop vocal sound there to a T, right? So it's very controlled, it's very sharp, cuts through the mix without being grating to the ear, and it's compressed to the point where there's not a lot of dynamic differences. Okay, so those are some of the characteristics I think of modern hip hop vocals. So I'll disengage these and isolate the vocals so you can hear kind of what I'm doing here, and we'll start here. Basically, the first step when processing vocals, almost always, for me at least, is subtractive EQ. Okay, and subtractive EQ, if you're not familiar, just means that we're cutting frequencies. We're not boosting anything. So this generally consists of two parts. The first part is, as you can see here, a high pass filter, which is just going to cut these low frequencies that you don't need, that are just going to muddy up your mix. Now, where you start this high pass filter is going to depend on the artist and kind of what you're looking for. I generally like to start at around 80 hertz, but that's just kind of a ballpark figure. The second step in subtractive EQing is finding frequency zones that you think may be problematic later. And granted, when you first start, this is kind of tough to do. However, as you continue learning, I'll even include a cheat sheet down in the description that you can download. But as you continue learning, you'll sort of learn where the problem zones are and where you need to cut, especially if you're working with the same artist over and over again. So here I've cut it about 230 and almost 1K. And the goal in cutting is to make the vocal as flat as possible before you compress. Because if your vocal isn't flat and there are sort of like errant frequencies that are sticking out, whenever you compress it, it's going to be really problematic. It's going to be an issue. So I just want to make this as flat as possible. So here it is with the subtractive EQ.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway.
Yeah, and that actually, that sounds worse than the vocal recording to begin with, but that's okay, right? Because that's not the only step that we're going to take part in here. So as far as the second step is concerned, we don't have to go too far into this. Basically, the second step is a de-esser. Light de-essing is what I'm going for here. As you can see here, I'm going to barely cut.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way.
Okay, so one thing that I see a lot with new engineers and producers is with de-essers, they'll either not use them, which is a big mistake, or they'll use them, but they'll just de-ess the shit out of the vocals. And that can really cause some problems, right? Because when you de-ess vocals that hard, it can also almost make your artist sound like they have a speech impediment, in that it gets really muddy and you can't understand certain syllables, especially if they're rapping fast. So very light de-essing, just to make sure that whenever we compress the vocals, those S sounds aren't going to get compressed and cause issues for us. Okay, so that's the second step. The third step is not really what we're talking about today. The third step is a compressor. Just briefly, this this first compressor that I use is mainly going to be to control any transients that are sticking out, any errant, syllables or words that could be an issue later. Basically, I'm using a really quick release and a really fast attack. You could do this with whatever compressor you wanted, as long as they have those capabilities. And as you can see here, I'm only going to compress between 1 and 3 dB. And there are certain words and syllables that aren't even being compressed there. So it's very, very light compression just to control the vocal. And basically what I'm going for here is a flat, controlled, rounded vocal that I can then work with, okay? Then I can mold it. And that sort of leads us to our fourth step here, which is where things start getting more fun. The fourth step is going to be additive EQ. So of course, unlike subtractive EQ where you're cutting frequencies, with additive EQ you're boosting, and that doesn't mean you can only boost. You can still cut some if you need to. What I've done here basically is I've used the F6 by Waves, which is very similar to the Pro Q by FabFilter. They're very similar in a lot of ways. Most people tend to like the Pro Q. I just use the F6 because it's convenient, right? But it's a dynamic EQ, meaning, as you can see here, like there are frequencies that are going to be boosted that aren't going to be boosted all the time, right? So sometimes you may want a band to be boosted, but only once the volume gets to a certain amount. So like ultimately, you don't want to boost these frequencies all the time because it can make your vocals sound kind of boring. So what I've done is I've boosted at around 125, a little under 1K, a little over 2K, and then I've added a high shelf. You can't see them, of course, but once I play the vocal, you'll see that it's very fluid, and it gives it a little bit more character than if I would have just boosted them otherwise.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway.
And I'll eventually have another video on dynamic EQ. So, that way if you want to learn more about it before you use it, then, of course, I'll provide that. But it really is a good tool. As you could see, sometimes these frequencies are boosted more than other times. And that just keeps things level, right? So that gives the vocal more body. I'll play it without it and then with it.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike.
Okay, now with it.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike.
Okay, so now the vocals are really starting to cut through. However, I do something, as far as the next step is concerned, that a lot of other engineers don't do. I actually learned this from a mentor years and years and years ago. But once you start adding this additive EQ, it's easy to go overboard, especially if you're going to be using another compressor in the vocal chain, which I will be. So what I do after the additive EQ, if need be, is add another de-esser. Of course, it's just light de-essing again. This time I'm using the Waves, just the basic de-esser through them. As you can see here, it's going to be light de-essing, but mainly what I'm trying to do is control some of those high frequencies that I just boosted. Make sure they don't get wild and out of control, because whenever I add this compressor next, I want that to be like solidly tucked in with the rest of the frequencies there. So I'll play with the de-esser.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On the turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway. Turn me on, I hit.
Okay, so you can hear probably those S and T syllables. So the S, T, T, T. If you compress when those are standing out like that, it's gonna cause it to sound weird, and you're gonna be wondering down the line, like, what happened? Why do the vocals sound like that? So I control them with the de-esser. Not everyone does this, just to be transparent, but it's something that I like to do. All right, so the next step is going to be a compressor again. Now, in this vocal chain, this compressor is going to be doing a lot of the legwork. Right, so that first compressor just controlled some transients. This one's going to be really driving and giving the vocals a lot of body. This is something that the LA2A has always done really well. So I'll play it without it, and I'll play it with it, and you'll immediately hear whenever the compressor is engaged that the vocals just have more character and body and weight to them, as I like to call it. Here's without.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne.
Okay, now with.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway.
Okay, so with that compressor, it's not that much louder necessarily, but it does sound heavier, and sometimes that's what you need to have your vocals cut through the mix. New engineers, oftentimes, from what I've heard over the years, whenever they're EQing and compressing their vocals, they tend to forget, saturation and adding body to the vocals, so it actually like stands out. Otherwise, unless you're using a great mic and a great setup, you'll have trouble like blending, with the rest of the beat. It'll either sound like you can't hear it, or it'll sound like it's just too loud, right? You can't really find that balance. So it's really important to use like an LA2A or a saturation plugin to make sure that's the case. So next thing I'm doing here is I'm using a Puig Tech, which is just a Pultec emulator. These EQs have been known for forever to have great smooth low end and incredible high end capabilities. So what I'm doing is I've increased the bandwidth to a bit more broad, and then here at 10K, I'm boosting, between 3 and 4 here, and it's just basically acting as like a high shelf. Just giving the vocals some sparkle at the end, so that way they can cut through that little bit more. So I'll play it without it and with it.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate.
Engaged.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne.
Right, so that just gives a little bit more character, a little bit more sparkle. It's not always necessary. Sometimes you can go overboard, but it tended to work in this situation. That leads us to the last step here, which is something that, again, not a lot of people do, that I see at least. This last plugin here is an SSL G Master bus compressor, and you usually use this on like a mix bus. And basically what it's good at is gluing sounds together. So whether that's an entire beat or entire song, or just a vocal track like this, it makes it sound very controlled, neat and tidy, and very like put together. So that's what I've done here at the end, just to give that little bit of extra oomph. So I'll go ahead and play it without it and then with it, and then that'll pretty much be it.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway. Turn me on, I hit you up just like a fireplace. I ain't hard to find, I'll be somewhere in them tri-states. Going hard, bitch. How?
And again, not adding a ton of compression there, just enough to where you hear the SSLG. It's a really iconic compressor for a reason, so I tend to like that. So I'll go ahead and play the vocals with no plugins engaged within the context of the mix this time. Then I'll engage the plugins so you can hear the difference.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway.
Again, you can hear the vocals, but they're not really ever gonna cut through. And even if you turn them up, it's not gonna be helpful. So here it is with the plugins engaged.
I'm in that old school, cutting up the highway, and I be just fine, cause I'm doing things my way. On a turnpike, coming down the interstate. My swag is airborne, I do it in a flyway. Turn me on, I hit you up just like a fireplace. I ain't hard to find, I'll be somewhere in them tri-states. Going hard, bitch, I don't mean no disrespect. They hear my hunger rap like I ain't had no dinner yet. I'm a red sight, you should take a picture of it. I'm not a latest man now, but the bitches love it. She wanna hang out with a star, that get me gloving. She think by fucking with me, somehow she might get discovered. I rep it from the start, where they shine in the dark. No matter where I go, I got Texas in my heart. The land of candy cars filled with ghetto superstars. And go to meal tickets, flipping Willy Wonka bars.
right, so that's pretty much it. I mean, look, we could go all day talking about different EQ strategies and little, tips and tricks here and there. What I wanted to do in this video is just sort of give you a basic outline for a vocal chain, and wanted to give you some idea of how to, EQ the vocals within that vocal chain. So of course I'll be expanding on this. I'll have videos coming out in the future that are about, dynamic EQ, de-essers, more compression of vocals, that sort of thing, so that we can round this out. But this is sort of a stepping stone to that, if you will, because I think EQ is one of the most important aspects of vocal processing. So if you like the video and you think you're going to get some value, feel free to like and subscribe. It really does wonders for the algorithm for us. Ultimately, if you want to see some of my beats or some of my work, you can always go to my website, which is producedbyvargo.com. And I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one. All right. Bye.